Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today at our amazing Be Women Solution weekly webinars, where we connect, we share, we learn, we really go through deep issues about that matter, and we reflect about how we're going to reimagine our future and discover a real purpose. A few words about Be Women Solutions. We are a global network of entrepreneurs that seek to balance the purpose and profits towards a more caring economy. And our webinar today will last around 50 minutes, and it's fabulous. The title is 5 Scarves Doing the Impossible. And our amazing speaker is Rana Dajani, professor of molecular cellular biology, and if you know her, an incredible human being. She is phenomenal, innovator, and has an incredible background. She is a fellow of the Jesson School of Leadership in University of Richmond, Fulbright scholar, Eisenhower Fellow, former Center of Studies or Director of Hashemite University of Jordan, Yale and Cambridge, a visiting professor. She has really rocked the world in things that really matter, and you will hear today. She has also developed a community-based model called We Love Reading, one of her most innovating ideas to really change the world. And she is one child at a time. She has for this won a number of awards that are one more impressive than the other. World Innovation Summit in Education, King Hussein Medal of Honor 2014, the Star Award in 2015 for IDEO.org, and JACO Social Entrepreneur, Ashoka Fellow. Oh my God. So with that note, we want to start first for a few seconds about the Be Women Empowering Move. That is to put your shoulders back, put your chin up, make your eyes twinkle with joy and determination, and with a super wide smile. Rana, the line is all yours.
Thank you very, very much, Laura. I want to greet everybody by saying Assalamu alaikum. This is how, it means peace upon you. This is how we say hello in my part of the world. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and this opportunity actually being part of Be Women rose because of Lubna Dajani, who is a relative of mine. So I'm really, really happy and proud to be here. And thank you, Laura, for making this invitation happen. I'm going to start by sharing my screen to put the PowerPoint up. And there we go. There we go. Can you see my screen? Yes, perfect. I always like to start my talk by sharing a story. Science and entrepreneurship and human beings are all about seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. That's a famous quote from a Nobel Prize physicist. And I like to say that in the past, as humans evolved, there were actually 2 groups of people. There were a group of people who sat around the fire and told stories. And there was another group of people who frowned upon those telling stories and saying, oh, you're wasting your time. But we can all imagine which group is the one that survived today. It was the storytellers. So in the spirit of storytelling, I'm going to share with you a number of stories so that we can survive better going forward. And I like to say I'm half Syrian. My mother's from Aleppo. And I'm half Palestinian. My father is from Jerusalem, 2 of the most ancient cities in the world, with a Jordanian passport. and this is, I'm not alone. There are many, many people who have these multiple identities coming from multiple cultures and backgrounds. And this is what makes us so unique yet diverse at the same time, and the beauty of humanity. When I introduce myself, I like to say that I wear 5 hats because I do 5 roles in my life. But because I don't wear a hat, I wear a scarf, I talk about wearing 5 scarves, which is the title of my book. The first scarf that I wear, that I'm very proud of, and the one that I first talk about, is that I'm a parent, I'm a mother. I have 4 children, and to me that is the most important role I can play or any human being can play, because they're taking care of the next generation, preparing them to make the world a better place. The second scarf that I wear, or hat, is that I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. I was actually a school teacher for 10 years before I became a university professor. And that's why I think the second most important person in our lives, in society, are the teachers. Because our children, if they're not spending half their time at home, they're spending them with their teachers at school. So teachers are extremely important. And I take my hat off to every teacher and any teacher, because if you can stand in front of a class of fifth graders, you can do anything. They will know everything about you, whether you really are going to carry out your threat or not, and so on. And we are always teachers. I mean, even now, to the last day of our lives, we're always learning and teaching and exchanging information. The third scarf that I wear is that I'm a scientist. I'm a molecular cell biologist. This has been always my dream growing up, to be a pioneer in discovering what's going on inside our bodies, inside our cells, so that we could help humanity to lead a healthier life, not just in terms of health, but quality, and avoid complications and disease if possible. My field of expertise are actually two fields as a scientist. The first field is that I study the epigenetics of trauma. So because of the Syrian crisis and many Syrians coming to Jordan, I don't like to call them refugees. These are friends and family, because in the past there was actually no border. It was colonization that made these artificial borders that divided us. So these are friends and family who came to Jordan because of the war, and we opened our homes to them. And me as a scientist, I was thinking, seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought, of trying to understand what was the impact of trauma on these children, not just on their mental health in the way of, collecting surveys so that they could describe how they feel, but more importantly, look at their physiology, look at their biomarkers, because your body doesn't lie. Your body shows exactly what's happening with them. So we used new methods in order to discern and measure the hormone of stress that humans secrete, which is cortisol. So if you're really stressed out, your cortisol rises up in your body. There's many ways to measure it. You could take a blood sample, but that's pretty invasive, especially when we're working with children. You could actually, it's in your saliva, and you could spit into a tube, but that's very, very messy, believe me. So the new way that science has come upon is that your cortisol actually deposits in your hair. So if I take a sample of your hair, I have a record for as long as your hair is in the past, because your hair grows 1 centimeter roughly a month. And so what we did is we took hair samples from these children, and we're able to look at their levels of cortisol and how it rose because of the trauma they experienced of war and displacement, and then how this actually, we were able to reduce it using interventions that helps the children cope with the trauma and build up their resilience. And our work was actually featured in Science. And this made me think, so I also wanted to look not just at the physiology, I wanted to look at their DNA. I wanted to see, does that trauma and displacement actually impact their DNA of these children? And of course the answer is yes, it does. But then the next question became, can this impact on the DNA be actually transferred to the next generation? The DNA itself does not change. It's how it is expressed is what changes. How much of it is expressed in the body. And so now the question became to try to study grandmothers who were exposed to trauma and looking at that signature of trauma in their DNA, if it's present in their daughters and in their granddaughters. And this is where we are today. This is a very cutting edge research, and we're really excited to see, because we don't want to ask the negative question of how does war and displacement make things worse for these kids. We want to ask, how can we help how war and displacement actually helps them? How do they cope with it? How does that build up their resilience so that they can move forward in a more positive and hopeful, optimistic way? The second field of research that I work on is I study ethnic populations. So in Jordan, we have two ethnic populations, Circassians and Chechens, who actually fled from southern Russia 150 years ago because of persecution for their religion. And now we are the world experts on these two populations, studying them from an anthropological point of view, epidemiology, and genetics. And we actually discovered a novel new gene that is associated as a risk factor with diabetes. And our work was also published in Nature. Now, of course, this led us working with genes and proteins, leads us to work with stem cells. And as you know, stem cell research is many times controversial. And so this led me to take upon myself as a responsibility as a scientist, that ask myself, if I'm going to do this kind of science, I want to make sure that I'm doing it ethically for the patients, ethically for myself as a scientist. Am I doing the right thing? And this led me to get engaged in policy and regulations and creating a committee that includes not just scientists, but physicians, theologians, ethicists, and lawyers to try to come up with guidelines on doing research using stem cells. And actually, we were the first country in the Middle East, in Jordan, to have a law that governs stem cell research and therapy in Jordan, which we're very proud of. And of course, as a scientist, I also, this leads me to evolution, and I teach evolution.
You can mention it also that there's an ethical part on this law that is very important, no?
Oh yeah, of course. The whole law, it governs the ethics and the values of when, because it's all about human embryonic stem cells. At what stage can I actually, use those human embryos, and when should I stop? For what purpose do I use them? What do I do with them if I'm not using them anymore? And all those, ramifications of that. In the context of Jordan, which is a majority Muslim country, but we took into consideration all religions as well. But this was the first law in place in the Middle East. And we became like a role model for others. And this leads me to the last part of my science hat or scarf, is I teach evolution as well, which is another controversial issue sometimes between religion and science in different parts of the world. And how I present it to my students, how I train them to be critical thinkers and not to accept things because somebody said so, but to ask the questions and be curious in seeking the truth. And therefore being better equipped to deal with any controversial issue, not just evolution. Of course, this leads me to my fourth scarf, which is I'm a social entrepreneur. And I founded We Love Reading, as a program that encourages children to read for pleasure, which I will speak about later in my talk. Now, my last scarf. Usually I don't tell people what my last scarf is, and I tell them you have to read my book, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to cheat and tell you all about it. So the last scarf, I didn't work for it. I didn't intend to do it. What happened is a few years ago, I got an email from an organization based in England telling me that I was chosen as one of the most influential female scientists in the Islamic world, which is 1.7 billion people, right? So that was about, oh my God, So I was looking through the email, and they had given a title for each one of the female scientists. So there was the cardiologist, the mathematician. So I'm scrolling down to see what name or title they had given me. And as you can see from what I've shared, I do a lot of things. And then lo and behold, they had given me the title of the Islamic Feminist. And I said, no, you can't do that. Because when you say Islamic, all the Western world is going to look at me, what is she about? And when you say feminist, all the other part of the world is going to say, what is she about? And I said, I ended up with nobody. And I said, could you remove it, change it? You know what? I don't want a title. I'm fine with my name. But they insisted. And so rather than, let's say, succumb to that title, I took it upon myself to redefine it on my own terms. And in order to do that, I went on a journey of interviewing hundreds of women and men, trying to understand not just what does Islamic feminist mean, because I didn't know what it meant, and I was being labeled for it. But actually, it led me to ask the question: how do we define success? What does success mean? And that actually what led me to write my book. So I need to thank them for sending me that title that made me go on this journey and actually write the book. So you can read the book and know more about those details.
But what title did they give you at the end?
Nothing. Said Islamic Feminist.
Oh, still. They should have said the innovator, social entrepreneur.
Oh yeah, I tried. They wouldn't get it. But it seems you need to, somebody has to provoke you to do something. So, I'm very optimistic always. And I think, okay, I'm going to turn this challenge into an opportunity and take it forward. That's why my husband says I'm so optimistic that I see a whole ocean in a drop of water. So that's me. Now, so I'm going to share with you, let's see, is where my journey took me, trying to redefine who I am as a result. So one of the challenges that we all know is that there are very low females in science, especially in senior positions. But it turns out it's not just in science, but actually it's in law, it's in business, it's in everything, right? And usually the first explanation for the lack of women in senior career positions is because women are not educated enough. And this is a very typical graph that L'Oreal puts out, that males and females start almost 50-50 when they're in school, but then as you go up in higher education and then senior positions, and I'm speaking about science in general, but this applies to other disciplines and sectors as well, we see that females become less and less and less and less. Now, when I saw this graph, I was kind of skeptical because I teach in Jordan and in many other places in the Arab world, and the graph from my experience does not look like that. The graph from my experience looks like that. We have over 70%, even in my department in science, we have almost now 90% females. And this is the same across the Arab world, whether you're talking Tunisia, you're talking about the Gulf area, and so on. So I drew this line saying, no, it's not about education, because in the Arab world, if we take that as an example, yes, we have lower females in senior positions, but we don't have lower females in higher education. So it can't be lack of education, lack of talent that is keeping women out. So the L'Oreal graph does not apply to the world, and it cannot be generalized because we have the data to show the other way. And not just that, there's an article analyzing the data from the Arab world, comparing it to other parts of the world. And apparently there's a lack of correlation between implicit attitudes and the gender gap index in the Arab world, which makes me think there's something going on correct in the Arab world, at least in terms of girls engaging with STEM in education and higher education. And rather than always look, the globe is always looking towards the West as a guide on how to do things. I think for girls in STEM education, the West is not doing a good job, as we saw in the graph. But I think something is going on that is right in the Arab world. So let's try to learn what is the Arab world doing right, and maybe we can have an equal exchange of talent, how things are done, so that we can share what we are doing right with the other parts of the world. However, leaving that aside, let's go back to our problem, which is why don't we have enough women in senior positions? And this is a problem across the world. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different disciplines, it's all the same. So this is not related to religion or culture or whatever. Everywhere around the world, the farther in your career, as you can see in this graph, women are dropping off. And the women that are dropping off are the married women and the women with children, not the single moms, the single women, sorry. Of course, compared to men. So definitely we have a problem. And so to me, the question then became, and as you can see, I'm tackling this as a scientist, so what's wrong? What's going on, right? So the next explanation is, it's because the workplace itself is not friendly for women, especially the women who are married, who have kids, because those are the ones dropping off. And so we see a lot of companies introducing a lot of measures. For example, maternity leave, a nursery in work, time off to go, nurse your breastfeed, having a room for breastfeeding. So all these measures are being employed in many companies, but they're not being employed enough because, I was actually at the headquarters of the UN in Vienna last January, a year ago almost, and we had a scientist from Bulgaria, a mathematician, who had just had her baby, and there in the whole building of the UN that represents, humanity, there was not one room for her to nurse her baby. And she was actually told you could go nurse your baby in the bathroom. So we're not doing it enough, right? Companies, organizations are not doing enough to provide facilities and a framework that is friendly for women so that they can be able to do and carry out in their career. So to me, the question then became, why do I have to beg organizations to provide something with me, right, for me as a woman? And I want to go back and say, even Apple and Facebook, they offered their employees to freeze their eggs until they retire or they're over the age of 40. What message is that, right? This is just a couple of years ago. It's telling women that, no, you can't be a woman. You can't be who you are, right? You have to be more like a man, meaning you're not getting pregnant, in order for you to succeed. And this does not make sense at all. especially if we want to say there is at least, and I'm just going to say one difference between women and men that is evolutionary, has been there for millennia, which is women have a uterus and men don't, right? Just that difference, nothing else. Although some men had told me, oh, biotechnology is going to get advanced and men are going to start having babies. And I said, fine, when that happens, we'll talk about it. But today, women are the ones who have a uterus who will bear children. Therefore,
Rana, very well said, because the studies show that the brain of the women and the brain of the men are absolutely the same. It's just culture that has stuck us with the care of the kids.
Absolutely.
So much to say on that.
Yeah. And when we say care of the children, of course, it's all the members of the family should be caring for the children, the father and the mother. But what I'm talking about is just the uterus, that those 9 months of a woman pregnant. These are things she should not be apologetic for. These are not things that she should hide. And these are things that should be actually valued and taken and appreciated. And not because, and so to me, the Apple and Facebook freezing eggs is something that is denying me who I am. And that's not right. And so then the question becomes, how do we strike a balance between acknowledging this difference, which is the having a uterus, while not being discriminated against for it, right? That's the balance. And most of the time, as women, we're actually allowing us to be discriminated against by denying ourselves this biological thing, which, back to your question, Laura, when we first were talking, is bringing up the next generation. It's producing humanity. How can that not be the most important thing that ever could happen? And so my explanation for this, why is this happening, right? It's mind-boggling. It's very clear to me as an observer that there's something wrong. So what's my explanation? This is my explanation, which I came up and wrote in my book. What I believe is that if we go back, way back, the society was more agricultural. And in agricultural society, everybody was working, right? In the field, there was everybody, the mom, the dad, the kids, everybody, the whole community was working. When we moved into the industrial, let's say, era, men moved out of the home and they were the ones working in factories, and they designed the framework of the workplace to fit their own, who they are, biologically, culturally, whatever. And so it was an 8-to-5 job. It was all about dominance and career. And they weren't thinking about taking care of kids or having to do anything. Now, what happened is when women entered the workplace later, especially after world wars, they didn't say, wait a minute, we want to design our own framework. No, what happened is that we as women tried to fit into that male-centric mold and tried to fit ourselves in by saying, oh, we don't want to show we're pregnant. It's okay. Well, somebody else will figure out the kids. And therefore, we were not able to be who we are. And it's like this cartoon where all the animals are measured with one stick, which is, can you climb a tree? A fish cannot climb a tree, but that doesn't mean a fish is not successful, because a fish can do something else. And I think this is how we need to change our framework. We need to change our rhetoric, rather than saying, because always the question is, how can we get more women into the workplace? I want to change that question. I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is, what do women want? And then trust them and respect them for what they want, and not force them to do something that society thinks they should do, because nobody asked them. We're all running, trying just to be a man or be like a man. And so what I see is that women, if they were left alone to come up with what they wanted, they would design a framework of success that is as colorful and as wonderful as this ceiling. I don't know if anybody knows what ceiling this is. This is the Gracia Familia from Spain. It's so colorful, so beautiful, so natural. And I would envision if women were designing their framework for work, it would be like this, colorful and diverse. And so, people talk about equality, which assumes everyone benefits from the same support, which we know is wrong. Then we moved into equity, equal access achieved through necessary targeted supports. And then we thought, no, we need liberation, where the cause of inequality addressed supports no longer needed. I want to add something else. I want to say, who said we want to play baseball, right? We're assuming everybody wants to play baseball. Maybe we don't. Maybe we want to do something else. And this is not just, and we want freedom. We want to be free, and society to trust us and support us to decide what we want, and not to have to follow another, a framework from another culture or another society or another people. And even when we decide what we want to do, that doesn't mean we have to stick to that. We can change our mind. So this was a study done at MIT following graduates from MIT. The men were the red line, where they moved up, and at 40 they plateaued. While for the woman, it was a zigzag, and they kept going up above 40. So it's okay to change your mind. Our bodies change. And this is evolution, right? It's not about culture or society. We evolved as a species where the woman is the one who has the uterus, the female has the uterus. And where there's a window for that, right? It's between an age of 15 and 45 or something. That's the time I can have a baby. So of course my priorities are going to change in different parts of my life. And therefore my definition of success is going to change. It may not change for a man because he doesn't have a uterus. So therefore, we need to trust ourselves and take that into consideration. And this is not just about women, by the way. This is also for everybody. You know, not every man wants to be the macho, dominant man, right? We are so diverse in humanity. There's no human being who is like the other. Our DNA is totally different. And when we look at the dichotomy of male, female, we think that's the only difference, but there are millions of other differences. And so this framework of giving freedom for everybody to define their own success doesn't just apply to women, it applies to minority groups, to men who, there's men who love to be teachers, but they're not encouraged. They feel that they're not, they don't feel the trust in themselves to do that. And everything else. And these are some names of really wonderful books that you could look and read about in addition to mine, Inferior, and the other one, Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. And so my book that I wrote, which is now translated into Arabic as well, so we have 2 languages, and maybe we can translate to other languages, it actually talks about that, doing the impossible. And that's where I'm challenging the rhetoric. If we can reverse cell fate, we know in stem cell research, in the past, when I was studying biology, it was said that you can't take an adult cell and turn it back into a stem cell. And if you actually said so, you were considered crazy or ignorant. But then somebody came along, a scientist from Japan, and said, wait a minute, who said so? Why not? And he was able to come up with a way. He challenged the status quo, the dogma, and he came up with a way to turn adult stem cells into cells from your skin into stem cells, and he got the Nobel Prize in 2012. And so I wanted to ask the same question: why, if we could do that with cells, why can't we redefine success, not just for women, but for humanity in general? And from this, I encourage everybody to write about their experience.
Can you mention here about the unconscious bias, that also how all these things have become like part of a truth that can be totally changed, as you say, but there's such unconscious bias that is really affecting us all.
Absolutely. And in order to remove that unconscious bias, there are many ways, right? So one way is acknowledging that it's there, training consciously to identify it and see it in ourselves. And there's a number of ways to do that. But more importantly, changing. So first you need to change the laws and the regulations, but that's not enough, because if the same old white men are at the table, they won't interpret the laws in the way that they were intended for. So it's also about changing who's at the table. And maybe one way going forward is to put quota, of having half of women there. And of course, women with merit, we're not saying just any woman, but having a quota will ensure that at the table, there's enough people who can interpret these laws and regulations in a way that supports this diversity and inclusion. And that's not just enough either. The third thing is that you need to ensure that there's empowerment of those people at the table, which is your point. How do we make sure that even if you have 50-50, that the women at the table are actually talking, are voicing their opinion, and are not being shut down, whether consciously or unconsciously, by the more powerful, dominant members on the table? And this needs training and needs confidence. And needs support and mentorship, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, about developing mentorship programs. So writing the stories is important, because we need to read stories of role models from around the world, not just one particular culture, but from every culture, because we need the young women and men, not just the women, young women and men looking up to these role models who look like them, who dress like them, so they can really dream and imagine that they can be those people. Giving talks like this one. TEDx is a wonderful channel for people to do a lot. My book, I gave a talk about my book on TEDx. So it's called TEDx Doing the Impossible. we developed a program for mentoring for female scientists, which actually is now applicable not just to female scientists, but to lawyers, to businesswomen, and not just for women. Actually, it's being adopted for all minority groups. We called it 3 circles of alimat because initially it was for scientists. And alimat is a word in Arabic that means female scientist. And it's about developing a partnership between 2 women, mentor and mentee, to help each other, not just professionally, but personally, sharing experiences in a holistic fashion. And we developed a policy report, and it's actually a free toolkit on our website for 3 circles of alimat. Anybody can take it and start it in their organization. It doesn't require hierarchy. It's very simple, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can start it in your own place, because we need, women and minority groups need support, mentoring support, people to bounce your ideas off, people to share your experiences, and so on. Now, lastly, I'm back also to the question, Laura, that you mentioned, which is, how do we do this, right? How do we change the unconscious bias? How do we change mindsets? Because this is a mindset, right? I'm challenging the mindset. And so to me, real change, first of all, takes time. And real change has to start with children when they're young. Because when we grow older, our brains are set. And it's very difficult to change them, with all respect to adults. But it's always more easy to start with children. And this is what led me to become a social entrepreneur and to tackle this issue, because I felt this huge responsibility. So what I noticed is that children don't read for fun. And reading for fun is very important because it widens the imagination. But more importantly, it gives an opportunity for children to learn about other people, other places, other cultures, so that they can think outside the box, and so that they can become the heroes they read about and have the confidence and courage to become change makers. Other than also learning vocabulary so they can express themselves and talk about their feelings, their ideas, rather than being violent and not being, and emotional, rather than talking and developing solutions. So I asked the question, why don't children read for fun? And I realized the answer is because they don't love it. There's no passion for reading. Reading is boring. Reading is a chore. So the question then became, how do you make children fall in love with reading? And again, through observation and research, we found out it's by reading aloud, by a parent reading aloud to the children. Because when the parent is reading aloud to the children, the neurons in the brain are making connections, and those connections have an association between reading for fun and feeling of security and happiness that stays with you when you're older. So when you're happy, you want to read, and when you're sad, you want to read, because it gives you this good feeling that goes back to that childhood moments when you were secure and happy. So I had the solution. The solution was parents should read aloud to their children. So what should I do? Can I go around and knock on every parent's door? I mean, that's impossible. Should I ask the government to pass a law? I mean, even if they did, who's going to make the parents follow it? So I did, the least I could do is be the change you want to see in the world, right? And part of my upbringing as a Muslim is that every person is a guardian, and I am a guardian to take care of my small society around me, my small circle, my community. So I started gathering the children in my neighborhood and reading aloud to them in a public space, which was close to my house, which was a mosque. So I started reading to the kids in 2006, books in the native language. So it's, they fall in love with it, from stories from their everyday life. And the kids fell in love with reading. They would take the books home and then with their parents, read aloud, or they would read aloud to the children, their siblings or their friends. And the children became the champions of reading in their household. And of course, this impacted not just the children's education, doing better at school, but boosting their empathy, their executive functions, but also it impacted the adults who are reading aloud to actually discover their voices figuratively and literally, becoming leaders in their community and change makers. And that's why our motto became changing mindsets through reading to create change makers. And the impact was also for the whole community. Till today, we're in 56 countries around the world, trained over 7,000 We Love Reading ambassadors, and impacted more than 500,000 children and given out more than 250,000 books. And We Love Reading has succeeded because it's simple, it's low cost, it doesn't cost anything. It's just one person reading aloud in a public space. These are volunteers. We don't pay them. They're aged from 16 to 100 years old, from every walk of life. They read in their native language, and the model is so flexible, they tailor it. So they could read in a church, in a mosque, in a community center, under a tree, it doesn't matter. And it's all grassroots. They adapt it to fit their own culture, and they own it. So we've won multiple awards, as Laura had mentioned, and we do research. So I'm a scientist. I wanted to study the impact of the program on the children, the adults, and the community, and in order to understand how it works and to make it better. So we invited scientists from different universities locally and regionally and internationally. And so one of them was that we actually developed children's books on different themes that were originally for fun, but had underlying messages like the environment or gender or disabilities. And then we did research showing how the attitudes and behaviors of the children actually all increased statistically just by reading books. So no TV ads, expensive and billboards, just reading aloud to kids. We also did research with the University of Chicago on empathy, and we showed that the children's empathy actually doubled just by reading aloud the story. And children were more friends, they were not bullying each other, even if they came from different cultures and backgrounds. We also did research with Brown University showing how working memory, inhibitory control, emotional regulations, 3 functions that make a child do better at school, therefore better jobs and better economy, just by reading aloud for 3 months on a regular basis. And we found that these attitudes are actually impacted the children from lower socioeconomic status even more. And therefore, it was now a program, not just for people living in a comfortable neighborhood, but for those vulnerable communities such as refugees and others. So what was the secret sauce of We Love Reading? Why did it spread? I mean, it's all over the world. It's been called a social movement. And what we've discovered, the secret sauce, is that the women and men who are reading aloud to the kids are actually doing it because they want to, not because they have to. They have total agency, and they're not victims waiting for somebody to save them. No, they're taking control, and this is what builds their resilience, and that's what keeps them going. So after training these women and men, even in the most dire conditions like refugee camps in Jordan, these women and men are still reading 4 years later. Nobody pays them. Nobody's doing anything for them. And when you go ask them, they say, we're not doing it for you. We're doing it for ourselves, for our community. And that's the secret sauce of We Love Reading, that we want to give it to the world. It's out there for free, especially now with COVID-19. The whole program is online for free. And we ask any program, just add We Love Reading, like a little bit of secret sauce or spice. And anything you're running where you complain people are not doing things, they're waiting for you to give them compensation. If you give them We Love Reading, they'll be doing it because that's the secret sauce. They're motivated because they want to do it. And lastly, we look at We Love Reading as a model where we're increasing, we're spreading around the world, but now we're spreading with partners like other NGOs, but eventually we're a social movement that's spreading all over the world, and we will disappear as an organization, but the We Love Reading movement will keep on going, spreading from child to child, neighborhood to neighborhood, because we feel it's a crime for a child not to fall in love with reading, to discover their inner potential in the whole world around them. So I'm going to end now saying that everybody is unique. As a biologist, nobody's DNA is like the other. Even identical twins, they are different. And so everybody has something unique to give the world, has a unique perspective. And if somebody tells you, who do you think you are? You're just a normal person. Tell them, you're not just a drop in the ocean. What is the ocean? It's millions of drops. And so everybody is important, and every one of us can find a challenge in their community, in their society, in their life, and try to think of a solution, and for them to actually go do it. When I started We Love Reading, or any of my projects, I wasn't thinking I want to do something big. I felt a huge responsibility that I have knowledge, and I have to do something with it. And I couldn't sleep. And so I started doing something small, just around me. And eventually it grew bigger. And that's the butterfly effect, which is another scientific theory, the chaos theory, which says when a butterfly flutters its wings in China, there's a hurricane in the Atlantic. So each one of us is a little butterfly, waving their wings 1 centimeter, moving the air, and resulting in a hurricane, right? In time and space, beyond what we can imagine, to make a difference in the world.
Can I interrupt you here for a few seconds? Is that we women, yes, we have our logo as a butterfly because we consider ourselves imaginary cells. they imagine the cells that are now in the caterpillar or in the cocoon that are now vibrating together so that we can create a beautiful world.
Absolutely. So it's the same theme. We're all on the same team.
We're all in the same world.
Exactly. So I'm going to end with a very short video about women in science, how we started our initiative just as an inspiration.
The world needs us because we are scientists, teachers, artists. We are in all walks of life. We are also the daughters, the wives, the mothers, and above all, we are humans. Humans need to question and be questioned, to think, to share thoughts and emotions, to spread knowledge. We create networks to experience moments, a sense of togetherness and joy. 3 circles of Alamet exists because humans are determined to make it into this world. So, shall we start?
So thank you very much. And I'm open to questions, reflections, and I'm here to learn as much as everybody else. So please, and I want critique, because that's how I grow, and we all grow together by learning from each other.
Wow, I mean, this has been amazing, amazing, amazing. I mean, I think there's 100 questions here that we can ask. But if you can, given that one of the biggest issues we have today is COVID, no? And everybody is unconsciously suffering or growing, improving. How does COVID impact your initiatives? Not only the Love to Read, the circles, and what are your challenges, and what are your aha moments to go beyond it? Because you are a source of gifts to the world. Wherever there's a challenge, you find the gift.
I feel it's a huge responsibility, actually. But yeah, I mean, COVID-19 as it hit us all, I'm sure, in different ways, depending on where we are in life and what are our responsibilities. Therefore, I can only speak about myself, because I'm sure others have had a much, much worse situation than us. We are very grateful to count our blessings in what we have compared to others. So I humbly say that. But COVID-19 made me reflect on what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? What can we do to make this world a better place in whatever time we have left in this world? And so I think it brought home that the urgency of that, and the immediacy of we can all do something. And for me personally, it was a more reflection of it really made me zoom out and think more about, not about creating an organization or creating a business or even pursuing success as such. To me, it was more about taking a step back, reflecting on nature and the world, and thinking of system change, thinking of how I can share what I've learned with the world, with people around me, to share it, just to be out there, engage with the world, without thinking that I have to achieve something at a certain time. And in a way, that was freeing. And I'll give you an example. So right when COVID hit, we had won an award we had won a competition for a startup for We Love Reading, because it's a nonprofit. We won a startup to make it into a hybrid, so have a profit component. And to me, this was a whole new world. This is business. I'm not a business person, as you can see. That's not one of my scarves, and I don't think I'm good at it either. But it was we got the award, and we were working with this incubator thing. And it hit me that wasn't the most important thing in the world. So sometimes one has to acknowledge what's important and what's not, even if the whole world tells you, but that's the logical next step. I said, no, I don't want to do that. And it's okay to say no. And to take a step back, and I thought, no, I saw myself as somebody who wants to just give. And so We Love Reading immediately went online for free for the whole world. And I said, I don't care about organizations. I don't care about getting a grant. I want this to be out there to help people. So I don't know if that helps answer my personal journey during COVID-19.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I have here Vanessa wants to ask a question. Vanessa.
Hi, Rana. Thank you for that. It's so inspiring and so beautiful to hear someone speak from the heart, really think, and then put it into action. My question was that with all the other points that you mentioned before, with your experience in research, have you identified like a secret sauce or a magic ingredient to help with all the gender issues and to push forward cultural changes? Because also we all come from such cultures per se, but at the bottom line, I would believe that the basis of most of them is pretty much the same. So how can we move forward to push that agenda forward? Just was wondering if with all your research and knowledge, you might have identified little things we can individually do to help.
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, that's the $1 billion question, right? If we could all solve that, that would be great. Yeah. So I can only lend some insights, like from my experience and what I know. I think to deal with the gender issues, it has to go back to respecting the individuality of every human being in society and acknowledging that. And we can base it on biology. As a proof that every person is unique and there's no unique group versus another group. And so the question then becomes, how do you change the mindset to see the world that way, right? When we look at humanity, really, let's imagine we're on Mars, we're coming from another alien species and we come in. What do we see? We see all these human beings, they're so diverse. We don't see male, female. We don't see white and black. We see diversity. We see fingers, we see hair, we see so many other million differences. So we need to bring back that naive, let's say, perspective of seeing the whole world as beautiful and colorful and different without honing in onto any particular differences. Now, how do you do that? It's starting with children. Maybe we can't save this generation, but we can't give up and say, if we can't serve them now, that's it. We need to have patience and think very long term. And that's why we love reading. It's about reading. And then through reading, you gain a new perspective of who you are. So it's about developing identity and identifying your priorities and knowing what you want. And of course, this requires a society that respects women, if we're talking about women, right? And trusting them. This is if I have a last message at all, it's trust women. Trust them. Society doesn't. Everybody thinks they know what we want, and nobody asks us what we want. So it's about stepping up, even ourselves as mothers, sisters, and this is also for the men who are listening, to trust women. And believe me, if women are trusted and they find their passion, they know their identity, they become happy. And if a woman is happy, everybody around her is happy. So that's my insight.
I have to my husband, I always tell him, happy wife, happy life. But I think that here, I mean, what you're touching is so important. Trust women, because we, for the last maybe 5,000 years, we've been put aside as we were just we were owned by men in many aspects, and only in the last 100 years is when women started to really get some empowerment and show with a beautiful smile and with a total confidence, care, and all these empathetic and collaborative values that we have, that what we propose is beautiful for everybody. So if you can harness a little bit more into something that's so important, that we know from neuroscience that more than 1 billion neurons our connections are formed every second in the first 3 years of the life of a child. Mm-hmm. And that how the brain is formed is how then we react in life. But women are the caretakers of these kids. So how come what else can we do? What is it that science can give us to really move forward this the childhood education?
So, so that's a two-part question. So I can answer that in two ways. One, speaking of the women, the early childhood education and the brain, it's by stimulating the child as early as even when the mother's pregnant, right? Because we know that the neurons are connecting and multiplying even at that stage. And so it's about providing a very rich environment around the child, starting very early and then growing up, because there's a window there. And there's another window at adolescence, but it's not as let's say flexible and malleable as it is in early childhood. Now, this is backed up by research. So there's actually a scientist here at the University of Richmond, Kelly Lambert, that works with rats. And she was able to show that rats who are given everything, actually without having to work to get something, are not better. Actually, they're actually depressed, number one, so psychologically depressed, and they're not very good at solving problems. And for rats, it's running through a maze. Now, when these rats were actually, another group of rats were taken, and instead of giving them their food just ready, the food was hidden. They eat Fruity Loops. They were hidden in a little mound. So the rat had to work a little bit to find the food and then eat it. Those rats actually were psychologically, their cortisol levels were pretty low. They were very not depressed, and they were better at solving the maze. So this also goes back to our evolution. We evolved as a species to go hunt and work and do things. And now with modern life, we're just sitting back and doing a lot of nothing, especially in terms of motor movement. So our brain, actually, a large part of it is motor movement, which we're not using anymore. And so these are connected with increased depression and so on. So back to your point, that we need to give a stimulating environment for our children, but we also need them to work for things, and which is more natural than just giving them everything ready-made. And one other piece of research from Lambert's lab, speaking of women's brains, she had shown in rats that the actual brain of the rat, when it's pregnant, goes through modifications that makes it more networking, so therefore much richer and with a lot more capacity and capability. So pregnancy actually is something that is a positive for the woman's brain, which a man's brain doesn't go through, and makes us, maybe that's why we can do so many things. And to me, that's a point where a lot of fellowships and opportunities actually stress that you have to be under 40, because they're looking at a man. When for women, the prime productivity after having their children, where their brain is being really set up, that's another window, comes after 40. And so I challenge all these fellowships and awards and whatever, that they should remove that limit for women. It may be for men, they have a limit, but for us, we don't.
Wow, I love that. I think that there's an amazing, we really want to have all the links of all that research, so that we can really read it and put it up there into everybody's. I hear there's from somebody in the iPhone says, thank you for your good talk, and and it's the kind of hope we need to listen these days. I'm also a former scientist turned in the interdisciplinary academic. As I listened to you describe patriarchal structures, I could not help but connect. You are describing capitalism, in particular, the kind that began evolving with the Industrial Revolution. Capitalism is a patriarchal linear, where people are low labor force, nature are transformed into resources, and there is one goal. Have you considered the capitalism framework as a working framework to change in your corner of the world? And how would you what would you modify of this capitalism as is today?
Oh, that's a big question. Again, the last two chapters of my book actually talk about this in more detail. For anybody who wants a more lengthy discussion on that. Again, I'm not a social scientist. I'm a basic molecular biologist trying to understand the world around me in a very simple way. So I totally agree. Patriarchy is part of capitalism, and it's been getting worse, I think, over time, or in different cultures and different contexts. How to tackle it, again, one way of doing it is actually what I'm doing now. I'm actually writing a second book. And this second book is about trying to challenge that there's only one dominating or hegemony of how we look at the world, which is patriarchy or capitalism. And I don't say in this book that there's another form that is better. Actually, the book is about showcasing how women perceive themselves in different cultures around the world. So we have somebody from Latin America, we have somebody from Sub-Saharan Africa, somebody from India, from China, from Eastern Europe, and from the Arab world, each one talking about how in her culture, throughout history, she and her culture, meaning the philosophy, the religion, the context, women are perceived differently. And so it's like a buffet for the world, for humanity, to see that there are different ways how we can define success, different ways of looking at women, so that we don't have a hegemony of one way, because all the rhetoric is Western, from a white, a white kind of Western thing. And not just to have a buffet, but also to provide a boost for identity, because many young girls who grow up in other cultures don't feel proud of where they come from, because they see the media painting a picture of what is success, how it looks like, which doesn't look like them. And so this gives them a kind of complex, identity crisis. So this book is about a buffet to help people be proud of where they come from, who they are, to have a voice, and then for anybody to choose. And you could pick and choose. Like I could like something in the Western culture, and I like somebody from a Chinese culture, and then make my own mix and match that fits who I am going forward.
Wow, that's fantastic. Is there any other questions in the line? It would be great to open the microphones. But I really am very interested in your second book, but especially I want to understand, because in this book you're going to talk about the mindsets of women throughout different cultures, and this means that you are touching with something very interesting that. I'm not sure if you read a book called The Chalice and the Blade, or the theory of Rana Eisler that talks about domination society and partnership society, that for the last 5,000 years we've been like in a domination society. It's not that capitalism, socialism, or communism have helped environment or society. They help, but it's not as profound. So will you be touching in a scientific way also this movement towards a more of leaving behind the paternalistic society of patriarchy and moving towards a more partnership or collaborative society?
Absolutely. I mean, which also relates to the name of your group, right? Caring economy. Absolutely. It's about, we want to remove competition. It's about sharing and caring and altruism, which is actually more fundamental to how we evolved as a species, where we care for each other. And this collective care is what allows us to survive. Speaking of this caring, collaborative society going forward is a huge theme in this second book, which was actually hugely inspired by COVID-19. I mean, I take a lot of long walks out in nature and reflecting on how the coronavirus and COVID-19 has actually showed how competition is not it's not part of normal evolution. These are constructs that humans have created, which do not follow nature. Nature is about harmony. Nature is about balance. Nature is about give and take. And we see it every day around us. And I think the coronavirus has come to remind us of our origins as a species, of this collaboration and helping and caring. And that's actually the introduction of the second book, which will be coming hopefully early next year.
People here are asking, when is your next book coming out? We want to read it. We want to read both of your books. Because this is such an amazing and innovative vision of how, because basically what you write in your first book is a wake-up call that women's need to be trusted. I think that's your message, that we are, as we have shown, that there's a left brain and a right brain, and the right brain, women predominantly have the use of that part of the brain that is all about collaboration, empathy, connection. Can you tell us a little more about the science behind the right and the left brain in women?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I'm not the expert on that, and that's a disclaimer. Science is so complex that you have to, when we dive in and really study, we cannot claim to know everything, and therefore, for more details on that, we can refer to more extensive references and experts. But in general, we know that yes, there are basically the brain, the left and right brain, have differences in terms of focusing on different, let's say, aspects of behavior, whether we're talking about the arts and the humanities and speech and language, or analytical and logical thinking. Now, whether there's a difference between women and men in this, we believe there isn't, and not at least in that. It's more a difference between people in diversity. However, because of the changes in the brain with pregnancy and your hormones, which comes from pregnancy, certain, let's say, empathy, like you said, feeling with others. Oxytocin is huge in this as a hormone. That we have this caring relationship with the other members of our species and children. However, this is not unique to women. Again, there are men who have these traits. It's just that they're not highlighted. They're not showed because of this unconscious or conscious bias of frameworks. You're a man, these are your descriptions. You're a woman, this is your description. Because you also have women who are not so empathetic and so on. So I think what happens is we try to fit into molds rather than relaxing and just being who we are. And it's not black and white. It's actually a fluid spectrum. And that's nature. Again, going back to nature and biology. Nature and biology has no silos. Nature and biology is not black and white. Everything is a continuum. However, modern science came with modernity and put us in silos. So we have humanities and sciences. We have chemistry and physics. We have women and men. We have black and white. When reality is not like that. And more we're seeing how these are merging. And we're seeing that we cannot solve the challenges of this century without interdisciplinary work and working together and collaboration and reaching across all disciplines and erasing these lines that have stunted us in our development going forward.
I couldn't agree more. But the interesting thing here is a comment from Asha that says in her community in South India, there's more of matriarchy where women actually bring the men into their homes. And I think that this is very important to understand that, as you were mentioning, we really don't want to have either matriarchy or patriarchy, because it's the same thing, where one is more valuable than the other. I mean, the damage that society makes to the brain of a kid when in a family there's somebody who's more valuable than the other that makes all the decisions. Can you talk a little more about that? This is something that is really so entrenched, because I lived in Latin America where patriarchy was everything. My father was everything, and everybody else, children and wife, were all second. How will we move out from that, and how can we change that?
Oh, that's again another $1 billion question of how to do that. I think one way is digging deep in our history, right? So yes, there were other philosophies way back and other examples, and I think showcasing those and highlighting them without being shy or apologetic is very, very important. Because we all have our inner voices that tell us, our gut feeling that this is wrong, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't feel right. But we quiet them, we hush them because it doesn't fit the society. So finding our voices, figuratively and literally, is very important. And knowledge is always powerful. Community is always powerful. Support systems is always powerful. And therefore this webinar is one of them. When we share these ideas, when I hear somebody like Asha or Laura or anybody telling me this, I feel, oh my God, then my idea is not crazy, right? I have a point. And then that's how we start changing. And it's us as parents in the future changing how we bring up our own children. And of course, any change has a sacrifice. I mean, somebody's going to sacrifice, but we have a saying in Arabic that you plant, they planted and we ate, we plant and they will eat. And so we may plant seeds of change that we will not reap them in our lifetime, but we know that our future generations will hopefully reap them. Yeah, that's the hope. We have to be optimistic.
you are definitely incredibly optimistic, as your husband said, that you're like you see in one
An
drop
ocean.
the whole ocean. I love that. I'll carry it with me, and I think that you've given us so many pearls of wisdom about how to actually move forward. And we are really looking forward to reading all the research that you mentioned and everything. So Rana, would you like to give us some closing remarks for the whole community of Be Women, that we're all about the caring economy, that we really want to focus on what matters for, on valuing and visibility of the work of care, the development of the human capital of high quality that starts in early ages, and the transparency, radical transparency of the caring in the world through either corporations and governments.
I mean, to add, just simply, I ask everybody to look at themselves and to think deep and to dream, just dream and believe in yourself and trust yourself. And nothing's impossible. Nothing is impossible. I think that's it. If those three things, dream, trust yourself, and nothing's impossible, we can change the world together. And read. I cannot emphasize that enough.
I couldn't agree more. I started a book club in New York City over 35 years ago. We are like 60 people. We read and read. And I believe readers are leaders, because if we don't read, we don't get the real knowledge. Imagine, we in 6 hours read Rania's book, and you get her life experience of 30 years. So reading is magic. It's getting
Absolutely.
The experience and incorporating it in a beautiful way, because it's very different watching a video for an hour. It doesn't get you there. When you read, you really get your inner world working and questioning.
Absolutely.
Do you want to give us a little bit of just the last few things about how did you start this program of a love for reading, in the sense of what inside of you sparked that initiative in yourself personally?
That's a great question. I relate it, I think, to three things. To growing up, to my mother. She grew up us on the values of being Muslim. And those values were three. One, that you have a responsibility towards your community. You have to do something. You can't, if you have knowledge, you have to do something with it. You owe it to your community. Not just your little family, but the community. So that was one. So when I realized it's about reading aloud, I had to do something. The second thing is that it doesn't matter to do something big. What matters is to do small things. Again, there's a saying that says, do little things, don't discredit little deeds. And so to me, it wasn't, if I'm going to think of changing the world, I would have never started. But I was just thinking, what can I do? What one little thing I can do so that my conscience feels clear. And it was about gathering kids and reading aloud. The third thing is about intention, that what matters is your intention. It doesn't matter whether you succeeded or not. So to me, it was all about, I have to try. My intention is to try. I don't have to worry if I succeeded. And just because I tried, right, that in the end, now We Love Reading is in 56 countries. So those three things that I grew up with, growing up as a child, found their manifestation, giving me the incentive and the motivation and the courage and the boldness to actually go out and do it. And that's why my message to everybody is that look around you. If you find a problem that bothers you, just think, what can you do as a human being in your own little circle? That's it. Don't think of changing the world. Don't think you have to create a business or a company or change a law. Just think, what can you do yourself as a human being? That's it. And then the magic will happen. Yeah, if you read, so this was the research a few years ago. It was published in Science from NYU, where if you read for 3 minutes, they tested people age 18 to 80 years old. Either they don't read, or they read science like a documentary, nonfiction, or they read pulp fiction, or they read literary fiction like Dickens or Tolstoy. And then they measured their empathy before and after, just 3 minutes. And they found out that if you don't read, or you read nonfiction, or you read pulp fiction, your empathy does not change. Only if you read literary fiction for 3 minutes, your empathy goes up. And actually, New York Times wrote an article saying, before you go on a job interview or you go on a date, read some Tolstoy so that you're more empathetic. And I thought, oh my God, if 3 minutes changes an adult's brain, with kids for 3 months, I'm going to change everything. And we showed it in the research I showed, that it went way up just by reading aloud. So reading is so important.
My God, I couldn't agree more with you, because that's what we are trying to do as Be Women. We are trying to really create that concept that if you have a dream and you have and you can trust yourself in changing, magic happens. And so we try to get women inspired to do whatever their passion is in every city in the world. And that's why we have like 100 representatives of Be Women to really fulfill their passion and do that, because and we're trying to put it, trying to harness it towards what we call the caring economy, so that we can really all be very familiar with what is caring. And so on that, I think it's been an incredible talk, Rana. I mean, I'm so grateful. We will be listening to this talk over and over, and we can't wait to also invite you for your next book, so we can really discuss that in detail.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing and learning together, and hopefully we will go forward together and make a difference in this world.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And on this, we want to thank everybody for being part of this call, and this has been recorded, and we'll send it to you shortly as well.